The book that has been awaited for 54 years. The spiritual communiqués, issued from the Plan of Sublime Duty and named Önder, Pioneer, in 1959, were compiled by Bedri Ruhselman. And since then, they have been preserved in the safes of notaries and banks. Their time has arrived after 54 years, and has been published in 2013. Compiled in 1959, published in 2013. And in October 2020, we started to read the pages from the original Turkish edition of The Divine Order and the Universe, and comment on these pages online each week, and finished in December 2022. This readings commentary series of The Divine Order and the Universe are of those recordings, dubbed in English.
Right now, we are online on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
We are on many places.
We are always everywhere.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. I am Tülin Etyemez Schimberg, President of Bilyay Foundation and the Metapsychical Investigations and Scientific Research Society. This evening, we will start reading The Divine Order and the Universe from the beginning. Last week, we made an introductory video. We talked about the life story of Dr. Bedri Ruhselman, and also how this book came about. And we read the introduction pages. And this evening, we start reading the book with you, and to make this first pages clearer for you, we made some preparations. I introduced myself. Please introduce yourself too, Bilgehan.
All right. I am Bilgehan Meral. I joined this video from Adana Spiritual Research Society. We, as members of Adana SRS, we intensely work on the divine order and the universe. We were visiting Istanbul from time to give lectures before the pandemic, but now with our new normal, we begin to work in a different way. Since I was a young boy, I am deeply interested in quantum physics, and later, because of my education. I was always curious, enthusiastic and percipient about such matters. I was also very interested in the spiritual matters and working hard in this field, as well. Yet I have never guessed that a day would come when my two favorite subjects will meet at the same point, until the opening of this book, The Divine Order and the Universe. I remember my first time of reading the book. Once I got in my hands, in that opening ceremony in Bilyay Foundation, I directly went to that small kitchen to be alone with the book, to see the first page. We were so curious to see what this book tells. My brother Turkhan followed me, and when we were in the kitchen, we saw that Engin Amir, another of our members, has beaten us doing it. And we silently went in and turned its pages, and the first word I saw was matter. I said, that was unexpected for me. It was certain that a very long studying was awaiting me, and we still keep on studying it.
Yes, we read it again, and our understanding widens. Both of us had our education in engineering, and from that years we already had an understanding on matter, the quantum physics and physics we are taught in our education. Yet, the most interesting thing was the knowledge in this book was given in the years of 1958-59, and the point quantum physics has reached today had been expressed in this book, isn't it?
Yes, and at this early stage of our video, in fact I need to mention that the book, from the start, gives verification about its correctness. It provides both information and trust. Until you reach to the end part of it, and then you think, so far what I read was true, so this end part should also be true. Honestly, this is a very good arrangement on the part of the higher plans. This gift is arranged in this way.
Interesting part of this gift has been awaited for many years. People have been always asking about it, when will it be open to public yet, when the book is opened. Many people told us that these first 20 or so pages of the book are too hard to understand. That is why you and I now are making this video to help people with our comments on these pages to overcome this obstacle so they can continue to read the following chapters. So we can play the role of the helping hand.
Indeed, as the first thing to do, we need to accept the fact that this book is given through mediumship. The knowledge in this book is given through the vocabulary of the medium and the people of this era. With this I mean two things. Firstly, the vocabulary is Ottoman Turkish, this is a disadvantage, and secondly, the many data that need to be expressed technically could only be expressed through the most technical terms the medium or the people of that time could find. For example, the term hydrogen is just like that. There is no particle physics department in Turkey back then, no professor of particle physics. Even the particles would be discovered in mid-1960s, theory of Higgs boson was in question only after mid-1960s. So, we cannot expect to see the particle physics in this book, how particles move, how they make formation with other particles etc. to make up proton, and protons make up atoms. So, most of it was expressed simply with the term of hydrogen. And also, this is a book that expects some effort from the readers.
Yes, this is another sign of authentication. The medium of the book was 17 years old at that time, and it contains such a diverse spectrum of knowledge that conveying all of these only from the medium's vocabulary was only possible in this way.
Yes, because back then, there was no such terms coined to express it. For instance, related to the Higgs boson, when people ask, what's the good of the CERN, this hadron collider? If you discover Higgs boson, what do we gain from it? That guy gives a clever answer. When the radio waves were discovered, we didn't even invent the radio yet. We had no idea about how to use them. So, in those days of the book, we didn't know about such things related to matter. So, what I mean is please don't expect to see the modern-day terms of some terms used in the book. However, we have every right to ask, I wonder if this means that. We shouldn't worry about asking.
It's been 7.5 years since the book was disclosed. Since then, we had so many insights as we read the book again and again. We come together and study it, and the book tells us anyway that this is a bridge knowledge, so it is carrying us from here to somewhere else. So, it touches everyone with a term, with a sentence, and no matter how many times we read it, we still find sentences as if we have never read it. Has such a quality. Instead of saying, I've read it once and understood it, I suggest you that first read it at once and then reread it by underlining sentences and studying these, so you can discover many more things. Another quality of the book is that a concept given at the beginning is repeated in a newer context at the end of it, and then you understand it better. In that sense, let's remind our friends that this book is a whole.
Yes, when I read it again as a preparation for this video, I found many instances previously I didn't discover about some concepts. But it is such a book. We must say this.
Yes, we will start reading the book from page 7 of the most recent, that is, 12th edition, which arrived last week. Alright, the book begins like this. Matter is a component constituting the ground for all influences and responding to these influences in varying proportions. Another meaning hidden in this knowledge is, matter has no ability to initiate a movement or take any action by itself, of not even the most rudimentary nature. There is no possibility of anything occurring or being done by itself in it. That is, matter only awaits the influences coming to it, and takes states, forms, or situations according to the directions of these influences. Therefore, if we think of any matter that is, let us assume, free of any influences, we have to accept that this matter will not have any form or state. We therefore call that matter which is isolated from all of its states and forms, which is beyond human understanding and imagination, amorphous or primary matter. So, in amorphous matter, there is no trace of any motion. It is the absolute and complete motionless state of matter. Since all features and qualities seen in matter are but the manifestations of motion in it, a form, feature, or quality of amorphous matter, which means the absolute motionless state, is out. Since such a state cannot be comprehended, although amorphous matter exists. For humans, this is equivalent to saying that it does not exist. Since amorphous or primary matter, because of its quality of absolute motionless, cannot make any movement or stir by itself, it is impossible for it to initiate a motion by itself and to display forms, states, and manifestations which are the consequences of motion in matter, without any incoming external influences. Following this knowledge, it can easily be understood that those things that mankind understands and evaluates as matter are the manifestations of various motions created by incoming external influences through the possibilities that exist within the constitution of matter, and not the amorphous matter itself. Such a tough entrance. What do you say, Bilgehan?
Well, as I mentioned before, the first word here is matter, and this word choice is intentional. The book says our first topic is matter. As I already stated in some of my lectures, this book is in fact a universe user's manual. That is, the book doesn't give us much information about the outside of the material universe, but it details the place of the material universe in the greater system, and after stating its position relative to the spirits and the original principle, then the rest, the whole of the book is all about the material universe. Nonetheless, because it contains higher vibrational information, or extremely high-level knowledge, we begin to understand that many things that we so far refer as spiritual are in fact completely related to matter. It details even the influence works in accordance with mechanical principles, with the natural laws, as it says at the beginning, we name as nature in a partial fashion, so it explains us how things work literally in harmony with natural laws, and only when we understand nature, not only trees, flowers, insects, this is the partial part we understand, the law of whole universe. When we understand the laws of the whole universe, only then we begin to understand what the spiritual development is and how spiritual development works within these laws. So, that's why the book has to start with this. Some of our friends or readers or critics directly consider this beginning in the book, termed as amorphous matter, as the Big Bang. It is not, in fact. The book will tell us in the following pages that there is a cycle, and yes, the book enters in at this beginning but then it returns to that side. It is like a bagel, it is a circle but also curves around itself. The book starts by talking about somewhere within this cycle, and with somewhere, I mean the amorphous matter. This amorphous matter, because it is written with matter, as if a suffix, we consider it existing. Yes, it exists in some way but it is completely out of our perception, our current senses. So, the beginning of matter is this amorphous matter, it is the most primitive part of this cycle, most primitive moment of its beginning. The book begins from the closest moment to zero. The moment of zero, you know, zero is a discovery. So, here the book doesn't talk about the beginning of the Big Bang. Latest research and measurements show us that the universe already exists, but in many points of the universe many Big Bangs are happening moment to moment. This is a very interesting point, Big Bangs are happening moment to moment. So, the book talks about one of these Big Bangs happening. So, it says that we are within an endless becoming.
So, indeed, as I also mentioned last week, this is all about our own universe, not about all universes. The book will mention them as well. The book does not talk about the absence of matter, it talks about a substance that exists and is able to respond to the incoming influence, but not in motion yet. As you said, the book doesn't talk about the creation of all universes, the Big Bang, it talks about the matter particular to our own universe. Later, the book will talk about other universes and that we can't understand them easily. So, as we listen and read the book, it may be helpful to begin by knowing that it talks about not the first creation of our material universe, but the moment the first influence comes to it, how manifestation occurs.
If time allows, we will discuss that first influence, as well, but dear friends, the important word here is motion, one of the important words. As we will see a few pages later, each cosmos has material motions particular to that universe, motions just after the zero, just after the beginning of cosmos, near zero. In each cosmos, let's say in cosmos of duty, the emotion doesn't necessarily mean motion as we understand it as vibration. But at the stage we now are discussing, the book begins talking about the initial motion of matter, its initial vibrational dimension. Let's first think like that, let's try to understand it in this way. And the book says that this initial motion is necessarily due to an influence, because matter doesn't have any capacity and aim in that sense, it is amorphous. The word amorphous is used in philosophy to point this initial state of matter. If our friends study philosophy they can see this.
See, it says all influences and later it will explain, classify and define those influences. It will also point to the source of influences. Here the most important thing is matters being a ground for those influences to come, emerge and manifest. Equally important point is this phrase. According to the directions of these influences, so matter, as a ground, responds to these influences, and without that ground, those influences don't appear. So matter is the responding factor. Then it means there is a property in matter's constitution to respond. Yes, as you said, it doesn't move and the motion is important, but we can't understand an absolute motionless state of matter, because we exist in all kinds of motion. What is this absolute motionless state?
Yes. That state of nothingness. Yes, indeed, we can't understand that. The book later will give this example of flicking a pencil to explain matter's response to influence. However, this is an analogy. Analogy means that we can and should think and imagine variations of the given example. It doesn't mean that we take it literally, as a formula. On the contrary, it means that you can only think about variations of it. So, here, matter's motion doesn't mean matter's moving from one place to another place. Again, amorphous matter's motion doesn't mean it's moving from this point to another point. It is such a low vibration, you may think it like a fetus's heart begins beating. This is also an analogy, but we may sense an imaginative understanding from such analogies.
Another interesting phrase in the first paragraph is states and forms pointing to the varied manifestation in matter. It's assuming properties. And another one, free of any influences, we have to accept that this matter will not have any form or state. This word, free, intrigued me, that is, being free of influences. There is a very interesting definition here.
Yes, now you caught it. I realized it didn't catch my attention. I think your liberal vision is better than mine. Yes, there is such a sentence here like this.
So, when the influence comes, it binds matter in a way, like a spirit's connecting to a being, to an atom, first in passive adaptations. Then it means that influence in a way holds captive that matter. Unless it comes, the matter is free.
Yes, there is such a perspective here. For now, this may be things I can say. Later, we can revisit this part we read with slides I prepared. Later.
This point of our video, let's summarize for our friends. Amorphous matter is matter that didn't receive influence, that didn't take shape or forms, that is free from those influences. The book calls it as original matter as well, meaning basic, fundamental, primary. They say all features and qualities seen in matter are but the manifestations of motion in it, so we can't see any matter that didn't receive influence. It is not manifested yet. Manifest means emerging, appearing, becoming. So, all matter we can see and observe is matter that received influences, that is, manifested. As the book says, amorphous matter is beyond our understanding and imagination. All those things we understand and evaluate as matter is not amorphous matter. And by saying this is equivalent to saying that it does not exist. This is also an interesting statement, isn't it?
Here, we can say that, let's take word of dark, that is, black. In some of my lectures I gave examples of discoveries of the darkest, blackest paint. It is black because there is no reflection from it. So a color is dark when there is no reflection from it. Such dark color doesn't respond to any influence, it absorbs all colors. On the contrary, white contains all colors, reflects them, but black doesn't. Later in the book, we will read this stage, which is darkness for us, so, they mean, it is not perceivable for us even we try to see or sense it. Even the slightest motion in the universe, is certainly a manifestation of spiritual development. Let's try to think it like this, dear friends. This motion is not necessarily of a cell, or of an elephant. Even in the slightest motion or movement in the universe, there is spiritual evolution, and also material development. So, as to the initial motion, a spiritual need had risen, a spiritual development, and under the light of the original influences that were sent to matter, its amorphous level ceased, and it had been set in motion, to vibrate. It is better to think it like this. A need has arisen. It is not arbitrary. And matter has set in motion exactly as much as needed.
Yes, and what we can underline here is, matter's self-motion is out of question. It cannot manifest by itself as forms and appearances. It needs some external activators. The book terms them as influences, and later, it will explain these in detail. Shall we continue? All these forms and situations, according to their states of fineness, roughness, simplicity or complexity, have sections that may become the focus for various understandings and views. As matter that appears with manifestations of high and complex motion display complex and highly developed states at that level. The ones that display themselves with lesser and simpler motions manifest themselves at that level of primitive and simple qualities. So, matter displays various values in innumerable degrees of development at various levels, from its primitive states that have the simplest motions, to their higher states that have developed the most complex motions. Therefore, the simplest matter means a state of matter which has taken its initial form by separating from amorphous matter through initial motions. In contrast, high or complex matter means the state of matter which has assumed complex states and forms through various compositions and forms of motion. So, now it talks about the states of matter. At first look, it seems complicated, but I think with our comments it will be clearer.
Yes, hear what confuses our friends who have been interested in spiritual matter, which confused me at first as well. We used to think that, fine state of matter in comparison to rough state of matter as development, we used to say this as our terminology. But here, the book establishes the terminology first, so the statements in the further pages are not to be confusing. So, we need to start from the square one, so, we can understand the book better. The states of matter, as organizations we see around us, let's say states of water, it can exist in solid state as ice, liquid state as water, gaseous state as vapor, and as recently found, in plasma state as well. We can take water as an example for fineness and roughness. But the states of simplicity and complexity points to the sequence of matter's development.
So be it ice, liquid water, or vapor water is still the same H2 molecule, the same property. So we can understand concepts of fineness and roughness by this. You can think it like this. The book will give an explanatory example later.
Yes, by comparing the examples of water and iron, the book settles the issue. As to the simplicity and complexity, it is about how much organized a matter is, how many its combinations are. Let's say it is a hydrogen atom, which has one electron and one proton, it doesn't even have a neutron. But in an iron atom, there are many more electrons, I can't remember the exact number, and also protons and neutrons in larger numbers. And in uranium, the complexity, yet still in order, is even much higher, yet this organization, these huge number of atoms, protons and neutrons work together without any glitch, so, it is much more developed. It goes up like hydrogen, helium, to uranium, of course, it is not the last one at the periodic table, but we are familiar with its name, so at uranium, this organization takes a very complex form, there are more particle combinations it has. So, how do these come together? By responding to an influence.
So the LHC is basically the most fundamental of experiments. It's like what any child would design as an experiment. You take two things and you smash them together. and you get a lot of stuff that comes out of that collision, and you try to understand that stuff. Now, in this case, what we're smashing together is tiny protons, which are inside the center of every atom. And in order to get them going as fast as possible, we have to build this huge 17-mile ring. And we run those protons around the ring multiple times to build up speed, almost to the speed of light. And then we collide two beams going in opposite directions at 4 points. And at those 4 points are 4 different experiments: Atlas, LHCb, CMS, and Elise. Now I work on the Atlas experiment. And Atlas is like a huge 7-story camera that takes a snapshot of every single collision. And that's billions of collisions. And the hope is that we'll see the very famous Higgs particle. But every time we've turned on a new accelerator at a higher energy, we've always been surprised. So the real hope is that we'll see the Higgs, but that there's also something amazingly new.
You can liken it to when we put a man on the moon. It's that level of collaborative effort. I would say it even bigger than that. This is closer to something like human beings building the pyramids. Why did they do it? Why are we doing it? We actually have 2 answers. One answer is what we tell people, and the other answer is the truth. I'll tell you both. And there's nothing incorrect about the first answer. It's just it's not the thing that drives us. It's not how we think about it. But it's something you can say quickly, and the person you're talking to won't, get diverted or pass out or pick up the Sky Mall catalog if you happen to be next to them on an airplane. Answer number 1. We are reproducing the physics, the conditions, just after the Big Bang. We're doing it in this collider, and we're reproducing that so we can see what it was like when the universe just started. This is what we tell people. Okay, answer 2. We are trying to understand the basic laws of nature. It sounds slightly more mild, but this is really where we are and what we're trying to do. We study particles because just after the Big Bang, all there was particles. And they carry the information about how our universe started and how it got to be the way it is and its future. At the beginning of the 1900s, it became clear that all known matter, everything that we know about, is made of atoms. And that atoms are made of just 3 particles: the electron, the proton, and the neutron. In the 30s, other particles were discovered. And by the 1960s, there were hundreds of new particles, with a new particle discovered every week. And there was mass confusion. Until a number of theorists realized that there was a simple mathematical structure that explained all of this. That most of these particles were made of the same 3 little bits we call quarks. And that there are only a handful of truly fundamental particles which all fit together in a nice, neat pattern. And there was born the Standard Model. Eventually, all the particles in the theory were discovered, except one, the Higgs. And the Higgs is unlike any other particle. It's the linchpin of the Standard Model. Its theory was written down in the 1960s by Peter Higgs and a number of other theorists. We believe it is the crucial piece responsible for holding matter together. It is connected to a field which fills all of space and which gives particles like the electron mass and allowed them to get caught in atoms, and thus is responsible for the creation of atoms, molecules, planets, and people. Without the Higgs, life as we know it wouldn't exist. But to prove that it's true, we have to smash particles together at high enough energy to disturb the field and create a Higgs particle. If the Higgs exists, the LHC is the machine that will discover it.
Let's assume you're successful and everything comes out okay.
Sure.
What do we gain from it? What's the economic return? How do you justify all this? By the way, I am an economist.
I don't hold it against you. The question by an economist was, what is the financial gain of running an experiment like this and the discoveries that we will make in this experiment? And it's a very, very simple answer. I have no idea. We have no idea. When radio waves were discovered, they weren't called radio waves because there were no radios. They were discovered as some sort of radiation. Basic science for big breakthroughs needs to occur at a level where you are not asking what is the economic gain, you are asking what do we not know and where can we make progress. So what is the LHC good for? Could be nothing other than just understanding.
Now, why did we play this clip? I am sure as we watch it, some sparks lit in our brains. We have also a table about quarks, leptons and bosons. Let's continue on it.
I am opening it right now.
Thank you. We worked you hard today, but adding some color will be better. Here, we must understand this. We had said an atom is made up of electron, proton, neutron, and it's a very rough definition, we know it now. Proton and neutrons, they are called as hadrons, as the collider at CERN is called. Normally, electrons are collided in labs, but this is for colliding protons. There are not many such colliders in the world, and this big. These protons and also neutrons are made up of quarks, but there are 3 types of quarks. So, they are made up of a combination. Next, we will have a slide of neutron and proton. So, the combination at the beginning is just like that. We can return to this slide later. As we talk about these, I am sure when we read this passage again it will be understood better. Now, protons and neutrons are made up of 3 quarks or similar particles. Now, it's the field of particle physics. Let's accept them as really, really tiny particles. There are other types of quarks, but don't bother to remember their names. These have different jobs. Some are particles, some are the energy packets that connect particles, some have properties to allow some chemical reactions of the atoms these combine together. But all of them appear as particles because all of them are in a certain level of vibration. In fact, they are in level of motion, in the level of elementary motion. Hence the word element, which means primary, initial, basic, the simplest level. So now, we talk about the motions just after zero, after amorphous state. So, it is not beyond it. The divine order and the universe talks about that stage, of course, according to our current discoveries. I think it was Peter Higgs who proposed Higgs boson in 1964 and only in 2012, something looked like Higgs boson is discovered in the collider and in 2013 it is accepted as existing. So, when it is proven, Peter Higgs is given his Nobel Prize. So, in theory, in formula it was established but proving it took so many years, until 2012. If we can return to the previous slide, in fact, don't think Higgs boson as a particle, it is a field. Just like Einstein's time-space fabric, the Higgs creates a field and by this field, quarks, leptons and bosons make a combination and the system we see here begins to be built up. They occur. And everything we see around us are made up of these, nothing but these. Only their combination changes. And what we call photon is light photons, that is, energy packets, and they allow the electron to be built up. I hope you could see it in the video. You can rewind and find the related part. An electron is without mass but through Higgs it attains existence. Also, it is mentioned in the video that many particles have found, later it was discovered that only through Higgs boson, many properties of particles come out. Then we look and see that the divine order and the universe explain this process. It says, myriads combinations occur. So, dear friends, these are the combinations the book talks about.
So, the science now is discovering how these combinations occur, what we now term as complexity. Complex is yet with the scientific knowledge back then. The book doesn't say quarks, leptons, bosons, but it defines all of these as simplicity, fineness, or complexity, roughness.
Yes. For example, at the end of page 10, A footnote explains the word combination as a whole or unity created by joining or merging of different parts or qualities in which the component elements are individually distinct. This is a good explanation. This 12th edition is richer with such footnotes. Thank you for your hard work. Yes, when we read and wonder what is this combination about, we need to take a look at the particle physics. We have to. This is not quantum mechanics, let's take it as particle physics mechanics. Of course, the laws of quantum theory are working as well, but at this point of the book, we are not there yet, like collapsing of waves as particles etc. They will be explained in the further parts of the book as how these organizations are put into use. Now, we are still in the elementary phase, at the beginning. Yes, we are still at the phase of the particle. Particle. Not molecules. So, the book soon will tell us that it is the initial hydrogen atom. So, there is an influence making up these combinations. And this influence or effect, by merging or dispersing the combinations, builds first electrons, then protons, as you just see in the slide. 3 quarks make up a proton, then these make up other combinations, and each of these is a development of matter that is particular to it. And why does each of these occurrences come about? It is not like, well, mankind will drink water, so hydrogen atom is needed to make up water molecules. This is not the reason. Even before the hydrogen atom, quark is needed because a novice spirit that is just entered with the material universe needs a basic simple level to start from, hence the initial quark. That novice spirit begins to receive impressions from those quarks, leptons, only impressions because at that stage, it doesn't rule or govern them. In the subatomic cosmos, governing or ruling is not novice spirit's task. By connecting to these particles and atoms that are formed under the light of the original principle and the original influences, the novice spirits progress by getting impressions and by developing themselves about utilizing these organizations, as we will read in further pages. This is how I understand this part.
So, to summarize, amorphous matter was inert and without motion. It didn't receive any influence yet. With the first incoming and activating influence, later the book will talk about it in detail. Matter responded to it. As it responded, starting from the most basic states to the more complex combinations, matter attained roughness, but as its content it became more complex again. We will read about the. So, again, in the simplest terms, just after the beginning of our material universe, there is an amorphous matter. It is inert, has not yet received an influence. After this matter received the influence, it responded to it in varying degrees, and to the degree matter responded to the influence, it became more and more complex, it became developed, it built more complexities. In that way, matter manifested properties, appearances, states. As it is said in the paragraph, states of fineness, roughness, simplicity or complexity. So, as we mentioned, it started with initial hydrogen and built upon it. As in our water example, it has different states, but at the basic level it is the same molecule. Its content doesn't change when it is solid, liquid, vapor, or plasma. It preserves its basic constitution, structure. Yet, when we think water, iron and uranium molecules, they are differing greatly in their conductivity and complexity. But iron or uranium appear very rough compared to water molecule. So, its rough appearance doesn't mean that it is not developed or not complex. So we can summarize this paragraph briefly, I think. If you don't have anything to add, we have 10 minutes left. Shall we continue reading?
We can, and this next paragraph explains in more detail what we discussed so far.
At this point, let us add the following as technical knowledge: the concepts of fine and crude states of matter, and simple and complex states of matter, should not be confused with each other. Differences in simplicity-complexity of matter are because of the motions that make the constitutions of matter less or more complex or developed. The matter combinations of a matter, the values that set up its constitution, namely the motions, are more enriched and complex. That matter becomes more complex and moves away from simplicity to the same extent. However, the concept of fineness and roughness does not have this meaning. In the case of fineness and roughness, the decreasing or increasing of the combination or value quantity within matter is not the issue. Thus, the fineness or roughness of a matter does not show its state of development, that is, its degree of distance or proximity to amorphous matter. Sometimes, with the strong external influences, the bonds between the parts of a matter's mass increase and strengthen. These parts even become so close to each other that their motions become limited. So, in order to influence their motions, it is necessary to send, to the extent of overcoming the influences that are strong enough to compress them. Strong influences. These comprise matter displaying dense, crude states. In contrast, if the bonds between parts of a matter's mass are weak, the loose bonds of these parts result in larger distances between them, and these parts are influenced by lesser and weaker influences. Therefore, to influence them becomes easier than influencing the previously mentioned rough matter, because the influences to hold them in this state are not strong. Because of this, it is possible to conquer them with more ease. And these are the fine matter that we call fluidic. So, simple or complex matter in every state can be refined or roughened without changing their stages. As an example of this, we can consider water. Its states of steam, water, and ice display differences in fineness and roughness among themselves. However, these three are but water matter, which is in equal distance to amorphous matter and is at the same stage of complexity. Similarly, a complex matter may sometimes be rougher than a matter which is, in contrast, simpler. For example, iron matter is more complex, but denser and rougher than oxygen. Here, we tried to explain this with the examples we gave to you. I am trying to find a phrase caught my attention, another interesting term like distance or proximity to amorphous matter.
Yes, it always captures my attention. Being developed, as a scale, is exactly this. If we wish to take it as a scale, development in the matter is its distance from amorphous matter.
Of course, words like distance, proximity, lower, higher, etc. are comparisons for our minds to understand. As humans, our minds grasp such comparisons better, like simple, complex, far, close, etc. Another interesting thing here is the difference of influences, being strong or weak. So as the content, the strength of the incoming influences varies to gather or disperse those matter, then the quality of their ruling or organizing matter also vary. Maybe we can say that incoming influences are not always the same. What do you say about it?
Yes, in fact, there was a good experimental example in the video we shown. At this collider in CERN, they say we accelerate protons in such high speeds that it is close to the speed of light. In a way, it means the level of the influence given. It is such a high level, close to the speed of light, so it is a very high influence that to be given to the hadron or proton. The influence of collide. Just like two cars colliding. If they are too fast, more the pieces will be broken. So, they increase the amount of the influence. So, the book tells us that dispersing or combining matter is done by tweaking the amount of the influence. There is a point that caught my attention here. Differences in simplicity-complexity of matter are because of the motions that make the constitutions of matter less or more complex or developed. If the matter combinations of a matter, the values that set up its constitution, namely the motions, are more enriched and complex, that matter becomes more complex and moves away from simplicity to the same extent. However, the concept of fineness and roughness does not have this meaning. In the case of fineness and roughness, the decreasing or increasing of the combination or value quantity within matter is not the issue. See, in states of fineness or roughness, the number of those quarks, the protons the quark make up, the electrons the protons and neutrons make up, and atoms, their numbers don't change. Only their distance relative to each other or relation change, and by this the whole level of vibrational system or the organizational system of matter change. As the organizational level gets complex, well, it gets complicated. As the development increases, complexity increases, and as it gets simpler and less complex or its distance to amorphous matter is less, here the distance is certainly symbolical, then it is simple matter.
So, as long as the influence comes, bonds between parts of matter get stronger, they even get close to each other. And the book says their motions become limited, that is, so those parts get closer to each other, let's say, as we see in iron. To make a change in the state of iron, we need a very high level of heat, that is, an influence stronger that bonding influence. Yet, for water we need a lower heat to affect the bonds between water molecules, so it is easier to do it with water molecule than iron molecule. Yet, as the molecules gets more complex, like in iron, then we will need a stronger influence, in this case, a higher degree of heat. So, in this sense, this phrase of with the strong external influences, the bonds between the parts of a matter's mass increase and strengthen. These parts even become so close to each other that their motions become limited, makes me think that incoming influences must be stronger to overcome these close bonds. So I think we can underline such points about this paragraph. There is a question, because the influences to hold them in this state are not strong. Because of this, it is possible to conquer them with more ease. Please elaborate on this.
Yes, but where and in what context? It is always important. First, let's read a few lines before this sentence. Let me see. These comprise matter, displaying dense, crude states. In contrast, if the bonds between parts of a matter's mass are weak, the loose bonds of these parts result in larger distances between them. And these parts are influenced by lesser and weaker influences. Therefore, to influence them becomes easier than influencing the previously mentioned rough matter. Here it says, previously mentioned rough matter. Not complex matter, because the influences to hold them in this state are not strong. Because of this, it is possible to conquer them with more ease. And these are the fine matter that we call fluidic. Yes, I think people think it in terms. Well, it is better to think it as vapor. Here, the book talks about states as roughness and fineness. For the fineness, take vapor, for example. Vapor, steam can be compressed or you can divide it easily. I am talking about water vapor, of course. In the rough state, it is harder to divide it when it is liquid water, compared to its gaseous state. So it is better to think it like this. Influence means effect.
So here, the important part is combining these parts, making bonds between them, making them closer, stronger the influence, that is, allowing all of these can be done by a higher or stronger influence. When matter is simpler, managing these is easier. So, it is better to see these part in that sense. The paragraph talks about how the incoming influence affects, manages matter, influencing matter from one state to another, from one shape to another, and how easily it can be done.
When we look at the chemical physics, we see that in those states of roughness and fineness, atoms of a molecule are more close or distant from each other. In the solid state, atoms are closer, in the gaseous state atoms have more distance between each other. So, influencing that state is easier. Well, I can advise our friends to be patient and to make effort as they watch and read. Not only patience, not only making effort, but both. After concentrating our attention on something, staying with it is very important. So, don't look for shortcuts. As it is said, one knows above as much as one knows below. This is the rule.
And we can only understand the higher plans by starting from understanding the manifested world. Since we are here now, we will give the world's due. We will first understand matter. Even the book starts by saying matter. So first we must understand matter and give its due. And as we slowly progress, the book will explain us from where the being comes and going to in this framework. First, let's really understand from where we came so then we can feel where we are going. about many things in this book. Even the scope of our current knowledge or our level of comprehension is not enough. We can't attain complete comprehension in here. After all, we explain as much as we understand, of course, and by our current understanding. And it can always change. It is not final. It can change, can be improved. And also, but to make mistakes, so your comments are valuable for us in that sense. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.